And let's go straight across to Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who also brought a private member's bill to amend Section 377. That was unsuccessful. He subsequently has now put out a petition on change.org attempting to drum up support to amend that section in the Indian Penal Code. Dr. Tharoor, welcome to CNN IBN. And before I get your views on what transpired in the Supreme Court today, I want to draw your attention to what a rather irate viewer told us this evening at on a call-in show. So this gentleman, launched into a diatribe against the media, English channels in particular, saying, in a sense that homosexuality is the preserve of the privileged. That you are essentially siding with the Latinwalas or the elite, and the non-elite, in his opinion, were all heterosexual. And therefore, in a sense, we are putting off large swaths of the country by, in a sense, engaging with this debate and being seen as sort of siding with, if I may, with the gay rights activists here. I'm sure you've come across some such arguments as a public representative yourself.
Well, this is a variation on the theme. The other one that I'm constantly facing is, don't you have more important problems in this country than sex? And I explained to them this is not about sex, it's about freedom, it's about our constitutional rights. We are in a situation where an 1860 law is denying a section of our population, not just elite as you well know, but very ordinary people as well, the opportunity to enjoy the same privileges we do of equality before the law, of non-discrimination, of dignity and privacy, which are all guaranteed by the Constitution of India. But we are denying this to one set of our people for consensual acts that they perform in their own private spaces, their own homes, their own bedrooms. They're not forcing anybody, and certainly my private member's bill provides no loophole for the use of force or for involving children, pederasty, pedophilia, any of those. It's just about consenting adults having consensual sexual relations. And frankly, this is something that the government has no business prescribing. We should take the government's nose out of our bedrooms, out of people's private lives. And nothing, it seems to me, is more important for us in terms of public consciousness than appreciating our constitutional freedoms and our constitutional rights. This is something that the gay, lesbian, LGBT community has been suffering from since the recriminalization of homosexuality and other practices. We have seen 578 people being arrested under Section 377. That is 578 too many. We just don't need in our country the law being an instrument to harass, exploit, intimidate, or unjustly detain people for what they do in private that does no harm to society.
Right. The activists, gay rights activists, have expressed what we said earlier on the program today, cautious optimism at the Supreme Court's decision to at least reopen this case and refer it to a 5-judge bench. How hopeful are you that it'll take a turn for the better as they see it?
I think it is certainly a ray of hope. Don't forget that the December 2013 ruling of the Supreme Court actually said that this is not the business of the judiciary. This is something we're going to kick the ball back to the legislature, let Parliament decide. That was the rub of that decision. What the Supreme Court has done today by agreeing to enter into the substantive merits of the issue before a 5-judge bench is essentially accept the argument, implicitly anyway, that this is the judiciary's business. In our country, we know that the judiciary has often interpreted the Constitution beyond perhaps what political parties may have had the courage to do. But the fact is that the judiciary is one instrument by which our democracy allows the legal system to keep in touch with changing mores and changing values in society. Today, in the 21st century, for us to carry this 1860 law on the books, a law, by the way, that has actually been scrapped by the very people who wrote it in India, the British. I think this is truly out of sync with the temper of the times. Before 1860, there is no recorded instance in Indian history or Indian mythology or the Indian epics or any Indian literature of homosexuals being arrested, prosecuted, punished or whatever. It's only the British Victorians who imposed this law on us. It's time for us to return to our own traditional values. We have been a live and let live society. All of us have come across homosexuals, not just in the elite, to repeat that point. And we have understood that part of the ethos of India is just let people be who they are and see them as doing what comes naturally to them, rather than using this kind of language to say it's against the order of nature to be what nature has made them.
Right. Regards the legislature and its rights and duties, Dr. Tharoor, it has been documented the distasteful remarks that at least one fellow member of parliament made when you attempted to present that private member's bill to amend section 377 to say, you know, why would you be interested in upholding homosexual rights or some such? Why do you see very few politicians speak out? I mean, Arun Jaitley and P. Chidambaram, for one, have come on the record to say that, you know, they look at the Supreme Court's earlier ruling as conservative and this must be re-looked at. You have been on the record several times over, but is it so politically explosive, you know, for a politician in 2016 to come out and speak out on gay rights? Or is constitutional freedom so abstract that it becomes very difficult for an elected representative to explain it to his constituents?
I'm afraid that probably is true, but first, to go back to your point about the distasteful remarks flung in my direction, I point out to people you don't have to be a cow to be in favor of protecting animal rights. I mean, you can actually extend your imagination to the plight of your fellow Indians, and I don't think that to suggest that I have a personal motive makes much sense, especially coming from the party that accused me of the opposite for many years and suggested I be named Minister for Love Affairs and so on. You remember this, a kind of invective that was flung my way when I was in government. So I mean, I've allowed myself to ignore this nonsense because the merits of the issue go back to the heart of what you were talking about earlier. We are here defending the freedoms of Indians, defending the constitutional rights of Indians. We're not here to talk about sexual practices per se. Having said that, let me say that clearly some politicians believe that their voters may not be ready enough to support such a change. And that may be why the judiciary is so important. I recognize that even if my party were to issue a whip to support such a private member's bill, which normally is not done for a private member's bill, but I'm saying even if it were to, we are 44 members, whereas the BJP was able to muster 71 to vote against even the introduction of the bill. Given that the numbers are so overwhelmingly skewed towards the BJP side of the House, if that party does not allow a conscience vote of its members, if it does allow a conscience vote, many BJP members will support us, by the way. I've spoken to several, including Mr. Jaitley. But if it does not allow a conscience vote, then there is no figure the opposition can come up with, including all the other parties who are willing to vote along with us, that will match the BJP's numbers. So Parliament is always subject to the tyranny of the majority of the day. The judiciary is a little less hamstrung, and so to some degree it makes sense that the judiciary is the place where this battle will next be fought. Having said that, I have not given up in helping change public opinion. I have put forward the petition on change.org that has now amassed over 40,000 signatures. At some point before the budget session, I hope we'll present it to the Prime Minister. Then I also want this to be debated in Parliament, even if we are destined for defeat. What I don't understand is the unwillingness of the enemies of this to actually prevent a debate. If we have a debate, we can raise the issues before the nation and let the nation reflect as to whether a reflexive rejection of this is entirely wise. And that's how public opinion will eventually change. I have no doubt that at some point in the intermediate or long term, this law will go. It's just that it seems so wrong that our fellow citizens should suffer unnecessary harassment until such time as the rest of the nation wakes up to changing this law.
Right, and this begs the question, Dr. Tharoor, that if this is an issue that's such a taboo, even for lawmakers, for people in power, for people who in theory should be setting the example by practice, what can be said about the people who are actually suffering the stigma. The law, however important, is just a part of social acceptance. Do you see that change coming? Do you see that acceptance coming when you put out a petition on change.org, or when you talk to people? Do you see the mindset, as we say, changing?
Well, the truth is that for many people, it's just not an issue they're focused on, and therefore, let's face it, even 40, 50,000, a lakh of signatures can always be countered with the argument in an electorate of 1.2 billion people, or a population of 1.2 billion people, how does a lakh matter? So you can always give that answer. Ultimately, most public policy issues are discussed amongst a small minority of people who care about them, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's constitutional freedoms, all of these issues. Now, one of you asked me, is it perhaps too abstract? And to some degree, it may well be. I mean, it's those of us who feel that our constitutional freedoms are worth defending and indeed expanding to include as many Indians as possible who feel this matters. We have been able to use provisions of the Constitution to extend rights and benefits to sections of our population that for millennia were excluded. The Dalits, for example, women, tribals. There are so many examples of people who for 2,000–3,000 years of Indian history were on the margins of our society, but who through our democratic constitution and its working have actually enjoyed rights, privileges, opportunities, access in our democracy that their forebears never had. So there's nothing wrong in seeing the Constitution as a living document that can be interpreted constructively, and I would like us to extend it to this other beleaguered and excluded minority, the LGBT community.
In conclusion, Dr. Tharoor, I am a believer that popular culture has the potential, in a sense, to bring change ground up. You watched Aligarh, I'm told, this evening. What's your take?
Yes. It's a superb film, exquisitely well made, very well written, and magnificently acted. Manoj Bajpayee in particular, he just lives and breathes the part of this sexagenarian homosexual professor being persecuted for his private life, and he does it with extraordinary grace and dignity. He fills the role, and at the end of the movie screening, it's difficult to see this youngish looking lively, vibrant young actor who has incarnated this man suffering in his 60s so brilliantly. I think the film is very good. The problem is it's almost too good a film to have mass appeal. I don't know if it's going to be a box office success, but certainly those who see it will find it impossible not to sympathize with the plight of the gay professor shown in the film. And I'm sure that when you see the film, you will yourself ask, what is wrong with us as a society that we want to penalize people just for being themselves?
On that note, Dr. Tharoor, appreciate you joining us on News 360 on CNN IBN tonight. I must point out I'm one of those 40,000 odd people who signed that change.org petition that you have initiated. Thank you for joining us tonight.